With my blood, I close the circle. You are nothing. You have no power over me. In the name of Isa, I stop you.
I never called this place home. To me, it was always the Illinois apartment, a small box in an old brick house on the outskirts of Springfield, inherited from my parents after their sudden and senseless deaths. Lawyers called it an inheritance, but I called it a concrete vault, permeated with the scent of lavender, which my mother had used unsuccessfully to mask the omnipresent dampness. At first, I simply rented it out, but the tenants moved out at a rate indecent even for a property that had seen better days. They mumbled something about a heavy atmosphere, about unseasonable drafts, and about sounds. No one could pinpoint the sounds, but their eyes gleamed with that same incomparable primal terror. Then I decided to get rid of the apartment, but I needed to fix it up before selling it. I arrived there in late fall, armed with a bucket of paint and a skeptical spirit, ready to auction off the lair of my childhood. The first warning sign rang on the very first night. I woke up not from a nightmare, but from the feeling of someone else's breath on the back of my neck. Not a draft, breathing, damp, rhythmic, and it seemed to me impatient. I turned around abruptly. Emptiness. But the mirror on the closet door was fogged up on the inside, even though the room was about 15 degrees. I chalked it up to a trick of the shadows and fell asleep with the light on. The next day, the spirit manifested itself differently. It began to imitate odors. At first, it smelled like burnt wiring, so distinct that I called an electrician. He couldn't find anything. Then, while I was painting the walls in the living room, the air filled with a thick, cloying odor of decay. The odor was localized. It was coming from an empty closet. Inside, on a wooden shelf, lay a dead pigeon, bloated with its eyes pecked out. The only problem was that the closet was locked, and I hadn't dropped the key from its keychain, and the bird looked like it had been dead for at least a week. I vomited right onto the freshly painted wall. Fear isn't an emotion. It's a chemical. It paralyzes the limbs and makes thoughts sticky. I bought security cameras. I installed one in the hallway and one in the bedroom. The motion sensor detected activity overnight. Reviewing the footage the next morning, I saw the bathroom door slowly open by itself. At first glance, nothing mystical, but then I launched a frame-by-frame playback from a black opening about 2 meters up. A cloud of steam slowly, as if reluctantly, emerged. It thickened into an amorphous shape resembling a human torso and darted toward the lens. The image flickered, and when it recovered, deep scratches ran across the inside of the camera lens, on the sensor side, as if someone had been dragging a claw across the glass. The camera was broken. My rationalism was crumbling. I began to get angry. Fear grew into a kind of desperate resistance. Being a secular person and far from mysticism, the first thing I did was call a priest. Father Mikhail, a heavy-set man with a red face, entered the apartment and immediately left. He didn't say a word, only shook his head, and as he descended the stairs, muttered something about, "This place shouldn't be consecrated but cursed." He didn't close the door behind him. The next step was the specialists from the internet. A young woman medium with crystals and bunches of dried sage. She laid out her paraphernalia, lit the sage, and began shouting incantations. For several minutes, a ringing silence reigned, broken by wild laughter. It wasn't a human laugh. The sound emanated from the walls, from the floor, vibrating in the glass. The sage in the medium's hands flared like a torch, and the girl ran out screaming, without even taking her crystals. I found her in the car, her forehead pressed against the steering wheel, repeating, "He said you're his flesh, you're not going anywhere." I decided to leave. Just pack my things and forget about this damn apartment. Let the bank take it. But leaving didn't work. The car keys were gone. The front door wouldn't open. It was as if the lock had been welded shut from the inside. I was trapped. Then I stopped being afraid and started researching. I dug through the entire basement, old archives, and found my father's diaries. And I came across a mention of a certain Einar Skog, a bone carver and ardent occultist who had lived in this apartment before I was born. He committed suicide in a mental hospital. But before that, according to my father, he attached something to the house that feeds on the pain of its inhabitants. My father, it turns out, was also struggling. He wasn't a believer. He was an engineer. In one of the notebooks, I found an inserted sheet of runes. It wasn't just an abstract ligature, but a Helm of Terror, Aegis Jalmur, only heavily modified, supplemented by the Thurisaz and Algiz runes inscribed within the circle of Isa. The schematic drawing was signed in my father's scrawled handwriting. Runic stave, circuit closure, works, but requires blood of the family. I never believed in the power of sticks and lines carved into wood, but I had no choice. Following the instructions in my diary, I found a sharp knife and a piece of birch board in the toolbox. I carved the symbols, checking each line. Just as I was finishing the last stroke, the lights in the apartment went out. It became cold, so cold that my breath billowed out in thick clouds of steam. Right in front of me, in the bedroom doorway, that same figure, composed of darkness and dust, materialized. But now it had outlines, tall, skinny, with unnaturally long limbs ending not in hands, but in what looked like bone fragments. The air thickened. The pressure on my eardrums became unbearable. The spirit advanced, and every step left scorched marks on the parquet floor. He didn't speak. He projected images into my mind. Me torn to shreds in this very kitchen, my parents in a mangled car. I realized the accident had been no accident, an endless agony. I slashed the knife across my palm. The pain was sharp, sobering. Blood gushed onto the wooden block, filling the rune-marked slits. I didn't pray. I simply looked at this creature and, following my father's notes, loudly, breaking my voice, recited the formula of renunciation. With my blood, I closed the circle. You are nothing. You have no power over me. In the name of Isa, I stop you. And then something happened that I can't explain from a physical perspective. There was a sound like a broken string, only 100 times louder. Light erupted from the stave, twitching in my bloodied hands, not warm but cold, violet white, like an electric welder. The shadow shuddered, its limbs began to retract into its body, its form losing its stability. The creature let out a screech that cracked the window pane. It tried to resist, its substance scurrying along the walls, tearing off wallpaper and knocking over furniture. But the stave drew it in like a black hole. A second later, the dark clot retracted into the center of the wooden plank with a deafening bang. A hollow, ringing silence reigned in the apartment. The smell of ozone and fresh blood from my palm filled the air. The runic stave in my hands turned black as coal and hot as a stove. I stared at it, afraid to breathe. A minute passed, then another. Nothing happened. The air grew light. For the first time in years, a draft from the window brought the smell of rain, not decay. I sat on the floor until dawn, clutching that charred piece of wood. With the first rays of sun, I was able to turn the handle of the front door. It opened. I tossed the piece of wood into the incinerator and left that same day without even closing the windows. I sold the apartment a month later for next to nothing to a young couple. 3 years have passed since then. The new owners sometimes send me Christmas cards. They write that this is the best place on earth. I never answer them, but every time I look at the scar on my left palm, I remember the screech of a dying shadow and think that the ancient Scandinavians knew far more about the nature of evil than we can imagine, and they knew how to make that evil feared.